Hello, everybody. So I want to do two things with you today. The first is help you install Python on your own computer so that you have your own Python environment working, where you can easily manage your own packages and install software as you need. And then second, I want to help set you up with VS Code so that you can use VS Code with that Python installation for Python development. So everything that I'm going to do today, I'm going to do on a Mac. In general, you will find almost everything I do is going to look exactly the same on Windows. There's one or two places where there's going to be a couple small differences. And so I will splice in a couple screenshots of things as they look on Windows and make sure to flag those for you when those come up, just so you know how things might look a little bit different if you're working in a different environment. So the first thing that we're going to do to get Python installed is we're going to search for Miniconda. Now, Miniconda is two things. One is it's a Python distribution. So when we install the software, we will be getting as a part of that package an installation of Python for ourselves. But it also comes with conda, which is a package manager a little bit like pip, which you may also be familiar with, but which is very popular among data scientists because it has a lot of resources that make it very effective for installing things that pip cannot install. So pip is kind of the standard Python package installer. It's good for pure Python packages, but when we get into some of the fancier tools data scientists use, having conda is really nice. Conda is also going to give you the ability to create isolated virtual environments so that you can have 3 or 4 different installations of Python on your computer if you need installations that have different versions of Python or different packages installed. So we're not going to get into all of the nuances of conda, but by installing this, we're going to be set up in good shape. Now, Miniconda comes from a company called Anaconda. They also have their own distribution called Anaconda. If you download and install Anaconda, it comes with something like 150 different packages pre-installed. That's meant to make life a lot easier. It turns out that it actually makes life a little bit more complicated. And the reason for that is having that many packages means you will almost inevitably end up with conflicts when you try to add or change the packages that you're using. And so Miniconda comes with almost nothing in it except for Python and this conda package manager so that you don't have to have packages pre-installed that you don't want, and that helps reduce the likelihood of package conflicts. So Miniconda is what we're going to use in this particular case. So when we get to the Miniconda website, we're going to come down to the installers. We're just going to use the latest Miniconda installer. If you're on Windows, you almost certainly have a 64-bit machine. If you're on a Mac, you want to look at this carefully, right? If your computer is newer, you probably have an Apple M1. If your computer is older, you probably have an Intel x86. If you're not sure which you have, if you go up to the Apple menu in the top corner and select About This Mac, you will see listed there under processor, it'll tell you what type of processor you have. So my computer's a little bit older. I have an Intel processor still, and so that's the one that I'm going to get. For Macs, it's a little bit easier to use the PKG installer if you're not comfortable with the command line, so that's what we will use here. So I'm going to download that software, and then I'm going to run the installer. We'll give that a moment. On a Mac, there's basically nothing to do here. Click continue, continue, agree. The default location is great. It's going to put it in a folder called OPT in your user folder, and you're off to the races. It's possible you'll get a pop-up saying the installer wants permission to access your downloads folder or something like that here. It's fine to say yes. Now, if you are a Windows user, there's one thing that's going to be a little bit different here. So let me cut to a Windows operating system just for a minute so that I can show you what it'll look like. So let me bring up an instance of Windows and VirtualBox here where I have the most recent installer running. And as we go through this process, you're going to see a couple little differences. First, it asks you if you want to install it just for you or for all users. You definitely want to do the just for me installation. It'll make all of the permission issues a lot more straightforward. I'm happy with the default directory. Then the second thing is, though it is not recommended, if you are interested in using a bash terminal emulator, then it is often helpful to add Miniconda to your path environment variable. Now, if you don't know what that means, you don't have to do this. If you are one of my students here at Duke taking practical data science, we are going to use those types of terminal emulators. So please do make this selection to add Miniconda 3 to your path variable, and then leave the other checkbox in place. And that's going to be the one difference that you want to deal with if you are a Windows user. Then we just hit next. We let it install exactly the same way that we did on the Mac, and we'll be in good shape. Once that's done, it says that it's completed successfully, and we're finished with that. We can move that to the trash. Now there's one other setting that I'm going to suggest that you modify, which is the following. When you ask Conda to install packages, there are actually a number of different repositories it has the opportunity of going to ask for copies of packages, and those packages may not always be exactly the same. By default, since this is released by Anaconda, it's going to go to their Anaconda package repository. In my experience and the experience of a lot of other data scientists, it's actually a lot more, you're less likely to run into problems getting your packages from a group called CondaForge. So what we're going to do is go to the CondaForge site. And there on the site, they're going to give us a relatively simple set of instructions about how to set up our installation so that it will always, by default, try to pull packages from the CondaForge group as opposed to trying to pull them from Anaconda. So what we need to do is open up a command line session in the terminal. If you're not comfortable with the terminal yet, don't worry, that's not a problem. And we just have to basically copy and paste these two lines. So I'm going to type command space, which brings up Spotlight Search. I'm going to type terminal. It's going to bring up a terminal session for me. Yours will probably look similar, but maybe not exactly identical to mine. Yours will probably look similar, but maybe not exactly identical to mine. Get this out of the way. And so what I'm going to do is copy these two lines, paste them here, hit enter, and we're done. So you may get this warning, you may not, it depends on your situation, but now Conda knows that the channel that it wants to reach, we've changed the Conda config to add the channel CondaForge. It's going to try to go to that resource whenever it installs things first. So hopefully that's good. Also be aware that means the first time you install a package after this, it might take a little while because it might try to swap out your actual Python installation to get a Python version from CondaForge. So the first time, just be patient with it. All right, so just to also show you how this would work in Windows if you're not comfortable using the command line, let's go to CondaForge, where we're going to get that little snippet of code that we want to use. And the code is going to be exactly the same little 2 lines of code that we were looking at for the Mac, so that's not going to change. The syntax for using Conda is always going to be the same regardless of your operating system. And then the place that we're going to want to run this is, although there is often many evolutions of the terminal in the Windows operating system, if you just write PowerShell, right, then we can just open PowerShell. That's going to open up. We can confirm that Anaconda is visible to this system by typing conda-h. This just says, show me the help documentation for Conda. This is just kind of an easy way to double check that your Conda is there and running. So we know that this has access to that. And then we're just going to copy these 2 lines of text. We're going to go over here. Put those in here. And we're done. And so you can use PowerShell. You can also use any other command line tool in Windows. They should all now have access to Conda, and they now have this configuration set. So the next thing we need to do is go get VS Code. So VS Code is very easy to get. We go to their download site. It's free software. You download the relevant stable build. I've actually already downloaded it, so I'm going to skip that step, but this should be straightforward for the rest of you. So what we're going to do now, since I've already installed it, is open up VS Code, which is fully written out as Visual Studio Code. And the first time you open Visual Studio Code, it's going to start by giving you a landing page and a welcome and talk to you a little bit about kind of the features that it wants to enable for you. So when we open this up, we should get a welcome page. Here we go. Saying things like getting started with Visual Studio Code. It may show up right on this page. It may launch onto this page initially. I prefer light themes, although many people think that makes me a monster. I really prefer a light editor, so I'm going to choose that. Then I'm going to leave these other things undone for the moment, and we're going to walk through a couple things on our own. So I'm just going to mark these as done for the moment. So VS Code is a very smart editor. They've designed this knowing how most people use it. So just to start things off, I'm going to open a new file. I can either click here, or I can go to File, New Text File. And I'm just going to write a little bit of Python. I'm going to say, hello. And I'm going to save it as my first Python script.py. And the moment that I save this as .py, you will notice that what we have in the bottom corner now is, do you want to install the recommended extensions from Python? Because it is noticed that this is Python. Now, if you click install, it will do most of the things that we're going to talk about, I think right off the bat. With that said, I don't want you dependent on a pop-up window, so let me walk through how to do this manually just so we're comfortable with it. So we're going to go over here. This button on the side is the extensions. This is where we add all sorts of additional functionality to our libraries. And Python is right at the top already. You can search for it if you need to. The version that we're going to install is the one published by Microsoft. At the moment, it has about 61 million downloads as of July 2022. So we're going to go ahead and install that. This will take a minute in part because this is actually installing more than just one package. It turns out that when we install Python, it also brings along a number of other utilities like tools for Jupyter and what's called linting, which is kind of checking your code as you go. So that'll take just a minute here to load up. There we go. So once Python gets installed, you'll notice a couple little things pop up for their trying to get us started with these different libraries. I'm going to close those for the moment. You can always get back into these if you want to explore them later, but for the moment, the important thing is that we've installed this Python extension. And as I mentioned before, if we come over here to the extension bin and I just delete the search that I wrote at the top, you will see in the installed list up on top, close the popular ones it's going to recommend and just see the 5 that are up there. We've actually now installed 5 different extensions, a number for Jupyter and a number for vanilla Python, all of which are going to prove very useful. We can see that Python recognizes that we are in this Python session. It's going to start loading up our Python tools. And the first thing that we're going to notice is by default, down here in the corner, we see that so down here we see this number, 3.9.664-bit. This is the specific version of Python in your computer that is currently being used. There are actually a couple installations of Python now on your computer. One of them comes from the operating system. That's this USR local bin thing at the top. We don't actually want to use that. We want to use the version that's in OPT Miniconda 3 that we installed. So we're going to switch to that by clicking on it. Now, from this point forward, this will take just a second. You get a little error message while it's switching. There we go. And now down here, you're going to see that it says base conda. And when you leave your mouse over it, it shows you the folder that your Python is coming from. And that's the one that we want to use. Now, to run a Python script, we have a couple options. The first one is to just hit Run Python File. And what that's going to do is execute the Python file as though you had typed Python on the command line and then the name of this script, right? So it's going to run the whole script and then exit again back to a terminal. So this is a somewhat familiar style if you have a program that you want to launch and run. Oftentimes, though, when we're working in Python, we actually want to work interactively. And so the other thing you can do is select a line of script that you want to run, and you type Shift and return. And what happens now is we are going to open up a session of Python and execute our code in that session of Python, but leave the session open. So we're now in an interactive session for programming. So if I were to say x is equal to 42 and then print 42, and I were to highlight these two lines of code and hit Shift Enter, you can see they're now appearing down here in this interactive session. Now, personally, I find it a little annoying to have my terminal on the bottom, so I'm going to move this panel over to the right, resize things a little bit, and now we're off to the races if we want to start writing a lot of Python code, right? We can y equals 7, z is equal to x times y, oops, x times y, print z, right. So at this point, we are running Python very successfully, right? And everything seems pretty comfortable. I do want to show you where we find the settings for the Python extension in case you want to play with some of those. So if you come over to extensions, I'm going to close this terminal for the moment so we have a little bit more space to look around. And you click on this gear, there's an extension settings option that you can click on. And this is going to show us in a nice graphical user interface all of the different paths that we have available for working with our Python interpreter. And as you'll see, there's lots and lots of different types of settings and enhancements that you can use that we'll talk about in some of our other videos. But these are all here and available, which is a really nice set of features. So the other thing I want to show you is I'm going to quit once more and open VS Code again, because that will induce a message that I just want to make sure you see. There we go. VS Code is starting up. You're going to see across the bottom, it says loading the extension, looking for extensions, and then you're going to get this notice, which says, we noticed you're using a conda environment. If you're experiencing issues, we recommend you let Python extension, blah, blah, blah. This will happen the first time that you open VS Code after you have been using conda. So kind of weird. But we're going to click yes, and we don't have to worry about it again. Now that problem is solved. So one last thing that you can do if you want to, and that often I would recommend to people, is just to go through the process of doing the first installation of a package after we changed from the default package channel within Conda to Conda Forge. The reason for that, as I mentioned before, is the first time that you install a package, it's going to take a little while. I think probably between 10 and 15 minutes. The reason is that it's actually going to uninstall the Python that came with the original installation and put it in its own version that it knows is going to be consistent with all of the other packages that it provides you. And so what I would just suggest, this doesn't really require much of anything, but if you open up your terminal, and let me put this over here and make it a little big, we can do something as simple as, in fact, install Python equal Python, and then just wait. And so what this is going to do is basically check for a version of Python, the one that is most favored currently by CondaForge. In my experience, it takes 5 to 10 minutes for this to go through this initial process where it's going to say all sorts of things like collecting package metadata and getting repository data. Then it will propose a plan to you. It will say, do you want to replace a list of things with a list of other things? You have to hit Y to confirm yes. You hit yes. Then a bunch more installations take place, probably 5 more minutes. After that, all of your installations will go much more quickly than that initial installation. But that first one, because we tried to switch the main source for all of our packages from the default package to, or the default repository to conda, that first installation is going to take you 10 to 15 minutes. And so sometimes it's nice just to get that out of the way. So wanted to flag that. So anyway, that's all you really need to worry about to get up and running with VS Code and Python development. In the next video, I'm going to show you some augmentations in different ways that you can use VS Code that you may find really appealing, such as a more augmented console that can have graphics appearing in them. So you can see your own plots, and when you look at a data frame, you have interactive HTML elements and things like that. So we'll do that in the next video. Thanks.